For the 60th anniversary of the model, Rolex has just released a new Oyster Perpetual Cosmograph Daytona with the reference number 126500LN. Let's take a look at where it stands in Rolex's history and in the tradition of this iconic design. Reference 126500 includes a design refresh, in fact, a renewal of the entire product line with an updated movement caliber 4131. And in an important sense, it marks Rolex's continuation of constant progress through cosmetic modifications and small steps in terms of technical innovation. As they pace ahead, they consistently and continuously continue to evoke elements of their own tradition. It is a tried and true method for them to ensure a certain persistence and continuity across the decades, which makes the new Daytona almost the perfect distillation of some 6 decades of the model's existence. When you take a closer look at the dial of this watch, at the face of reference 126500LN, it involves some updates, some modifications on the 116500, which was the first generation of the Rolex Daytona that featured ceramic bezels for the tachymeter and that took the desirability for Rolex's self-winding chronograph up to a different level. One can say that this hype, this desirability that made the Rolex Daytona the ultimate aspirational sports watch, an ultimate luxury item, extends all the way back to 1988, which is when Rolex introduced their first integrated self-winding version of their chronograph, the Rolex Daytona, building it on the base of Zenith El Primero caliber 400, which Rolex, of course, built as caliber 4030. So 2023 being the 60th anniversary of the Rolex Daytona altogether is also the 35th anniversary of the automatic versions of the Rolex Daytona. So it makes a lot of sense when you look closer for the new 126500 to largely mimic the looks of 16520, which was the first self-winding reference of the Rolex Daytona, built on the base of one of the first, if not the first, integrated self-winding chronograph movements in the entire world, and that is the aptly named Zenith El Primero, of course. You can see how the outer rings that allow for contrast and legibility are quite elegant and very similar to the new model. Look at those grooves that allow for that extra level of contrast and depth. I think that's a really subtle but masterful stroke of design. And of course, the luminous markers for the hour, for the indices, are also very similar in the sense that they are shaped and elongated analogously to how the 16520 was designed. So, in a very distinct way, in a very important sense, the new Daytona reference pays tribute to that first generation of self-winding Rolex Daytonas, namely the reference 16520, which played an important part in turning the Rolex Daytona into the brand icon that it has become today, and increasingly so in the 21st century. Another important detail that caught the eye of many was, of course, the new look for the bezel, which is now set into this ring that is made out of the same metal as the case. So stainless steel for stainless steel, precious metal for precious metal. And that, of course, harkens back to those early hand wound versions of the Daytona. For example, this reference 6241, which actually had uh, bakelite or acrylic inserts for the tachymeter bezel, and aesthetically um, evoke this sort of utilitarian form that protects what was, of course, at the time, a very fragile material. Um, Ceramic bezels are, of course, usually lauded for their durability, for their reliability, but they're not unbreakable, they're not shatterproof. So, in addition to that particular look that the new 126-500 achieves due to this bezel ring, I think it also serves a certain utilitarian purpose as well. But altogether, I think the combination of these two elements, the revitalized look of the dial that harkens back to the first generation of the self-winding Daytona reference 16520, and the refined bezel insert design that looks back to the early hand wound pieces, such as the reference 6241, I think show this piece as the great distillation of the Rolex tradition of the chronograph that the Rolex Daytona is. As I mentioned before, the new Daytona involves an updated, a modified caliber, which is admittedly only a slight upgrade over the 4130, which was the first generation of Rolex's own in-house integrated self-winding chronograph movement. But ultimately, it is more durable, more shock resistant, more precise, and more performance oriented in the way it lives up to the 72-hour power reserve. And exclusive to the platinum execution of the reference, the Rolex Daytona actually now has an exhibition case back, which is a first for the Oyster case in the regular production line. And in the contemporary catalog, of course, this platinum version of the new Rolex Daytona is the only Rolex watch with an Oyster case that has an exhibition case back. And it's also distinguished, as you have seen from the previous photographs, with this gold skeletonized rotor that has kind of a slight inspiration of a steering wheel, of course. As I mentioned before, the entire line of the Daytona, the entire Daytona family has now been updated and refreshed. So now there is this consistency and uniformity in terms of the size, proportions, and form of the case, whether we are talking about stainless steel, um, variations of Rolex's own proprietary gold alloys or platinum, including also, of course, the precious metal models that are presented on Oyster Flakes bracelets. You always will have the same case. And both the Oyster bracelet as well as the Oyster Flex um, models have Rolex's easy adjustment clasp, which of course increases the utility and wearability of this watch. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell all your friends if you have enjoyed this video. If you can spread the word, you will help me a great deal in achieving my next goal on YouTube, which is 5,000 subscribers. I'll be forever grateful for that. Stay tuned in the meantime for further content on the novelties emerging from Watches and Wonders 2023, and of course, more takes on our shared passion for wristwatches.